All right. This one is going to be a bit of a long form video. Um, if it does exceed 10 minutes, I'll try to keep it under 10 minutes, but if it does, apologies in advance. What I would like to be talking about today is world class managers and world class clubs. What I mean by that is by the world class managers, I mean managers that are really good managers and not those that just benefit from a really good club setup slash club system. There's a difference between a manager that is really, really good. Like they can take a terrible club and push it up there. They can take a relegation club mid-table. Mid-table, make it fight for a Champions League position. And then those that are in Champions League positions, make them fight for the title, so on and so on. And then there are also certain teams. You don't really have to be a world-class manager, but you are forced to innovate, adapt, because they do not tolerate nonsense. And by nonsense, poor results. And it's not always that the clubs will judge the manager based on the final score, but it's also based on how they lose. Because let's say, for example, they beat a team, but it ends 1-0, and then you find that in that team there are not really a lot of recognized players, and then the team that's won 1-0 has so many stars, but they're not scoring goals. One manager that did make it apparent, one manager that I feel he was slowly getting there to becoming world class was Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. I know it sounds silly, but he did have those characteristics. He had that bit of an edge to him, but he wasn't world class, but I could see him going there. Yes, Manchester United is run in a not really run. They had the quality of players, but he also had the way to manage them. Because should be Rashford's highest goal scoring tally. I think that came in those 2 seasons, which Solskjaer had his full seasons. The 1920 season and the 2021 season. Because 1920, that was when Martial and Rashford both hit they both hit 20 goals each. I think they both scored 17 goals in the Premier League, and then what I did like about those two was the link-up play. World-class managers know how to keep players happy or just make them perform. I've seen players, they may not look happy, but they're scoring goals and whatnot. That's what a really good manager can do. One thing I didn't like about Ole, though, was his subs, and then he had a certain favoritism to certain players. I think that's what let him down in that certain department. Because there was a particular match that was Manchester United versus PSG. It was in the Champions League, right? That was a group stage match. We were leading 1-0. Rashford at that time had scored. No, PSG scored. Neymar scored with. It was a goal that could have been prevented. Maybe De Gea, if he stretched his leg out earlier, could have done something, right? But Rashford scored. It was a deflected goal. And then now this is where you could tell that Solskjaer was a bit out of his depth. At that point in time, the PSG players were diving. They turned Old Trafford into a swimming pool. Anything, they jump, they foul, they jump, they start rolling around, they start crying, ref, they crowd the referee. It was so annoying. And to make matters worse, the referee was buying whatever the PSG players were selling. And at that point in time, Fred was becoming a bit erratic. At that point, he was running, he was doing a good job, but he was becoming unnecessarily aggressive. He had a yellow card. Solskjaer had a good amount of time, because I'm sure he knows his players, he knows their decision making, but that's the flaw that he had. He trusted his players a little too much rather than trusting himself. Because at that point, Fred, he was on a yellow card, and then there was a 50-50 with Di Maria. Funny enough, he actually got the ball, and then it's one of those things whereby he gets contact with Di Maria, but Di Maria it was so frustrating because you could clearly tell Di Maria has dived and he's trying to get his friend sent off. And then you know what happened? Fred was given a second yellow card. It was not supposed to be a foul. But Solskjaer knew very well that he was on a yellow. These PSG players were diving and the ref was tolerating whatever nonsense the PSG players were doing. He could have subbed him off earlier. He really could have, but he didn't. And then when Fred got the red card, I think Neymar scored 2, or I don't know. I just remember PSG won the match 3-1. And then once again, that decision making reflected back in the Europa League final, where Rashford was supposed to be subbed off. He was not in that game. And then one of those again, his decision making, because other parts of Solskjaer was quite alright, because he never made too many contradicting statements. And then what it was is that he was a former club, I could say club legend. He did score in that, Champions League final. He had that heart of the club. You could tell that he was setting standards there, creating that energy to win. Because even that game for PSG that I was describing, there was a point in time he subbed on as many attackers as he could just to try and get something. At least he would, that decision making. It's either he would make the sub too late or he would not make the sub at all. And then what killed him off, or what really disturbed his progress, was the club. And you see there. So the way it was at that point in time, Solskjaer was, how can I say, at that point an up-and-coming manager. He was doing really well with Manchester United. And then what they did was, they did the wrong thing. Because at that point, Solskjaer had everything. He had the base. He had a good goalkeeper with De Gea. He had a somewhat solid backline, because Maguire's first 2 seasons of Manchester United were solid. That's one thing I can say. They were solid. In fact, when the reason why we lost that Europa League final in 2021 was because Maguire got injured. So he had a good backline. Yeah, Shaw would get injured, but with players like Luke Shaw, if you have a second replacement, he will never get injured. Because when Alex Telles was playing at Manchester United, it was very rare to see Luke Shaw injured. And then you had the midfield. You had Pogba, McTominay, Fred. You also had some others. I've just forgotten their name. Yeah, Fred. I didn't really like him at first, but one thing he would always do, he would run. He would have that energy towards helping the team win and complete what they want to do. And then that team had goals. You had Rashford, you had Greenwood, you had Cavani. Who else? You had Martial, even though he was on and off. You also had Odion Igalo. You would pop in with a goal or two. Scott McTominay, there were so many goals. The only problem we had in that squad was our weakness was a low block, because every time we played against a low block, we would struggle. When we played Istanbul Başakşehir, the match we lost 2-1, they played a low block, we couldn't get past that. When we played Sheffield at Old Trafford, the match we lost 2-1, they played a low block, we could not get past that. And there were so many other games whereby like Manchester United would just be so stagnant. We didn't have that type of player, and they did buy Sancho to help, because at that point in time he was a really good up-and-coming player. And in that 2020-21 season, Sancho had 20 goals and 20 assists. I think it was maybe 29, but he was really good. But now the fatal flaw that Manchester United made was signing Ronaldo. Because we already had Cavani. Here we had an experienced striker who was willing to, sit some games out and let the players play. But with Ronaldo, you have a lot of more opportunities, but then you also get a little bit of more problems, because Ronaldo, he's going to want to start every game. That's how it is. And Solskjaer, at that point that he was as a manager, he wasn't really at that point where, he could control Ronaldo. So on top of that decision-making problem he had, they brought in someone that is very difficult to control. So that also affected him. And because at that point in time, Ronaldo was in his 30s, and Manchester United at that point, yes, they would drop back, but they were very quick on the counter, and they had a lot of pace. So now when you bring Ronaldo, yes, he's a proven goal scorer, but we already had Cavani. And then you're going to create problems with Cavani, Ronaldo, but you know what? Greenwood had to be starting games. Rashford was in good form. Martial was also there. Then you'd probably even have Dan James. I know he wasn't that good, but he's also going to want game time. And then everything just fell apart. Whatever Solskjaer's game plan was, it just went elsewhere. It really did. And then he left. He was eventually sacked. One thing that really did hurt me was that he bought Van de Beek and never used him. What was the point? It's one thing if a player is bad, but it's another thing if a manager buys a player with no intention of playing that player. Donny Van de Beek, what if he just stayed at Ajax? He had those markings of, and then he could also bite back, like give those statements that seem arrogant, but he would prove it. I remember when he was complaining about the fixture congestion, and then he said, yes, they know that we play the game on Wednesday, and then they give us a Premier League fixture on a Saturday instead of a Sunday. They want to see us lose, but we won't give them the joy of seeing us lose. And you know what happened? Manchester United went the entire season unbeaten away from home. Yeah, it might sound it, but he also had that little bite to him. And then there was also that interview when he was being criticized by Robin van Persie. because Robin van Persie felt that Solskjaer was smiling too much, and he was too happy. And then he said, I don't know, he said something along the lines of, the only thing that he has, or the only thing that he's going to take away, or the only thing that he has on me is my jersey number, and that's it. You could tell he was frustrated, and he would give those statements. And then, even in certain games, you could tell he was angry. Like, he looked like a nice guy, but I think he's one of those you would not want to be in the dressing room when he's angry. He was just so close to being a world-class manager, but didn't really reach it. And then there's another, I don't even know if I can say fraud. Not fraud, but another one that seemed to be a good manager is Zidane. I would say he's good at man management, but when it comes to being a manager, because he started off with a job at Real Madrid. And then after he did it, that three-peat, which involved a lot of dodgy VAR decisions, right? After that, you know what he does? He decides to wait. No, he left because, Ronaldo left, and then, I don't know, some other things were happening. Then instead of looking for a new club, he comes back to Real Madrid after like a period of 1 year. By that time, Real Madrid had had already sacked 2 managers. And that's a sign of a world-class club. Especially when they're high with the expectations of winning trophies, providing good performances. If the club is there and the manager it started off here, maybe wins his first 5 games, but then it starts to drop. Other clubs will be like, let's get down to his level. He'll probably reach up. Real Madrid, if they're here and then you start dropping down, you're gone. They'll bring someone that will bring it here. That's what they do. And that's what they did with the other 2 previous managers. And this is where I'm supposed to get to the point of the world-class clubs and what they do. But just a bit, Zidane, after arriving at Real Madrid, he won the league in his first season, but that was after Barcelona were going into a terrible period. And then the next season, lost the league on the last day, knocked out of the Champions League by Chelsea, and then you know what he does? He leaves. And then not only that, instead of him looking for any club to, manage, you know what he's eyeing for? France national team, which is currently being managed by Didier Deschamps. And I mean, look at the squad that France has. Yes, I know that very good managers are supposed to have very good squads, but certain managers, especially world-class ones, they challenge themselves. Like, for example, Carlo Ancelotti, he managed Everton. And from Everton, those first 5 games that they played, Dominic Calvert-Lewin, James Rodriguez, Doucouré, they were all over the place. They were scoring goals for fun. And the fact that he managed to get Dominic Calvert-Lewin to score 20 goals in a season, that's a sign of a world-class manager. James Rodriguez was balling out in the Premier League. Everton were frightening to play. They really were frightening. Unai Emery, when he went to Aston Villa, yes, that was when, at that point, Steven Gerrard was managing, and then he got sacked. Unai Emery, Aston Villa under Steven Gerrard, relegation contenders. Aston Villa under Unai Emery, Europa League. After Europa League, they're not qualifying for Champions League. Yes, they missed out on Europe, but the fact that from fighting from relegation, they are fighting for European places, that shows you the level of manager that's there in Unai Emery. Jose Mourinho, when he went to Roma, not to say Roma is a small club, it's a big club, but at that point in time, they were not there. He won a trophy in his first season. He got promoted to the Europa League. And that referee, he saw that match because that was a clear handball. The Sevilla players, the Sevilla player fouled the Roma player to the point that Roma player started bleeding, and then no card was dished out. That one Mourinho got robbed, but you could see that world-class managers elevate clubs. Because if the club is here, the world-class managers will bring it here. Like with Carlo Ancelotti, they finished 10th. That might not seem like a lot, but considering it's Everton and the type of football that was being played was insane. It was insane. Unai Emery, from relegation, Aston Villa, they're now fighting for European places. Jose Mourinho, at that point in time, Roma, they're not doing too well, but he was raising the standards there. And then you can definitely see the impact of a club when that manager leaves. Like when Carlo Ancelotti left Everton, they fought relegation for 3 consecutive years. That's Everton. Which other club is? Anyway, that's just a few. But now let me get to the like world class clubs now. So with world class clubs or very high expectation clubs, and it's funny enough when people think about Real Madrid, they immediately compare it to Manchester United because Real Madrid and Manchester United have such close chemistry, right? But if you look at it from like a football standpoint, Real Madrid is more similar to Chelsea rather than Manchester United. Yeah, Real Madrid and Manchester United have a very high global audience, but in terms of management and the way players are treated, I think Chelsea and Real Madrid are more closely linked. Because during that Roman Abramovich era, they did not tolerate nonsense. They were sacking they were sacking managers left, right, and center. Antonio Conte won them the Premier League. Next season, wins them the FA Cup. Gone. Maurizio Sarri wins them the Europa League against Arsenal. That was the Europa League final. He beat Arsenal. 4-1. Hazard had a wonderful performance, got them to play the Carabao Cup final against Man City. They lost, and the whole Kepa shenanigans. And then what happens? He also got them a top 4 finish. They get rid of him. They tell him, bro, nah, you out of here. Frank Lampard, he had a very good first season with Chelsea because at that point they were given what's that? I think they were sanctioned by UEFA. They signed an under 18 overseas player, and then they were banned. And then you could see the way Lampard was playing with the youth players. They gave him time because at that point he had the players, but he didn't have the players he wanted. And trust me, they were a good team to watch because all of those young players were going out there to prove themselves. That Billy Gilmour performance versus Liverpool in that Carabao Cup match, that was really lovely. He really put emphasis on playing the youth. Then that second season, he got all the players he wanted. Lampard fell off the cliff, and if you look at it, he was given a lot of grace period because he was a former player. But eventually, he got sacked after improving the squad, and then he helped them get past the group stage of the Champions League. Thomas Tuchel wins them the Champions League with Frank Lampard's players that he was failing to play. World-class manager Thomas Tuchel. But international football, that's not his thing. It's okay. You can't be perfect at everything now, can you? Yeah. So he makes them win the Champions League. They lose the FA Cup final. They do win the UEFA Super Cup final. And then somewhere along the line, Chelsea just fell off the cliff in the Premier League, mainly because Reece James injury, Chilwell injury, and I think we are all familiar with the Lukaku saga. You know what happens? Binned. That's how Chelsea were moving ruthlessly. I mean, he got binned in the second season, in his third season, but his second full season, if you know what I mean. He got chased mainly because of Ronaldo. Chelsea at that point wanted to sign Ronaldo. Thomas Tuchel didn't because he was in his 30s, and Thomas Tuchel was probably trying to build for the future. And then he came from a club, PSG, which had a lot of high ego players, and I think he was trying to avoid that with Chelsea. And he was already struggling with Romelu Lukaku when he was giving out statements saying that I miss Inter. Why would you go out and give a statement like that when you're playing for Chelsea? It's a weird thing. He showed him out. Not really showed, by showed him out I mean that he made him sit on the bench. That's what you have to be able to be stern with some of these players. So then Thomas Tuchel gets sacked. You see how Chelsea are similar? Because Real Madrid don't play. They had 3 managers in one season. Carlo Ancelotti, with all that he's done, did you see how quickly they were to get him sacked? Yes, it might say mutual agreement, but trust me, Ancelotti probably would have wanted another season, but Real Madrid say no. You've done what you can, but no. And then there's always this thing of sometimes you have some clubs make it seem as if they're there, but they're not really there. And one manager that makes me question such things about world-class managers and world-class clubs is Mikel Arteta. Yes, he did help the club grow, but he's came out second for 3 consecutive seasons. 3 seasons in a row, he's come out number 2. So now tell me, if Mikel Arteta, let's even remove Mikel Arteta from the equation, right? If a manager at Real Madrid was to finish 3 consecutive seasons second, would he still be at the club? Real Madrid, right? How about PSG? Would it still be the case? No, right? Manchester City? Probably not. Liverpool, okay, but with Liverpool, you can give Jurgen Klopp grace because Injuries. Injuries, because that type of football he plays, gegenpress, it's very intense and it's so physically demanding. And if you noticed, 1920 season, Liverpool win the Premier League. They they go, okay, they play like very intense football. Next season, a season full of injuries. They recover, and then in the 21-22 season, they played the Carabao Cup final, they played the FA Cup final, they played the Champions League final, and then they went all the way to the Premier League. Do you see an expression of that type of football? They played so hard. Next season, full of injuries. And then the season after that, they were also with injuries. And then, like you could give him that, you could understand, because the type of football that he played, he didn't really have the squad. So you understand him. You really understand what he was going through at that point. And then I think that's why even Liverpool gave him all that time, because he wasn't really being given that much money to invest in the squad. Yeah, he was given a lot for Darwin Núñez, but we all saw how that turned out, right? I mean, yeah, because Mikel Arteta, it's not really it's one of those, the club and the way, when you manage like a very big club, yes, there's pressure on you as a manager, but there's also pressure on the players. So sometimes what happens is that the players play you out of that pressure. Because there are certain matches you can tell this manager is not doing anything, it's the players that are doing everything. Like, let's say you have a manager that's known for playing 4-3-3, constant back passing, keeping possession, then out of nowhere, the team just starts attacking. Those are the players saying that we cannot continue this nonsense, let's go and win this game. That's the players helping the manager. That's what happens. Yeah, it could have been the same with Solskjaer, but with Solskjaer, at least there was that game plan of we'll stick back and then we'll see what happens. He never really adapted from that. He never really did. But because Solskjaer, I really do believe he's going to be a good manager. But time will be the one to tell. Time will be the one to tell. Yeah, and with certain clubs, not only is it that it's not only the club themselves that keep those high standards, but it's the fans. Because if it's Italy, the fact that the fans can call the coaching staff, players, come here, explain to us why you lost. And the players and the captain and the coach will have to explain why they lost. They have that power, and the players, yes, you may say, no, I get you trust. You do not want to upset those. You do not want to upset those guys. If it's PSG, it's worse. When Messi won the World Cup in 2022, the fact that the PSG fans were chasing Messi, they were even chasing Neymar, because at that point in time, I think there were growing frustrations with the club that these guys here, they are doing whatever they want. They don't really respect our managers. Because Mbappe, Neymar, and Messi, it's a wonderful squad to have if you're playing FIFA or Dream League. But in reality, that is practically a manager's nightmare. That is a manager's nightmare. So much okay, not really ego, but each player believes that they will score with any chance they're given. And so that means they will not pass to their teammates when they're open. So you have all those I don't know, like egos, pride, and it's so and I think even the PSG fans got sick of it, because if you look at it now, the players at PSG have Doué, Dembele, Kvaratskhelia. They do whatever the manager asks of them. They don't really. It's not that they're not talented enough, but they're disciplined enough to say we'll follow the manager. And Luis Enrique is a wonderful manager. He really is. He is even the type of football he's playing, it's wonderful. Yeah, I know that I've not really explained a lot on the world-class clubs. I could be speaking rubbish, but I'll allow those. I'll allow comments to correct me, to say if I'm speaking sense or any of those things. Otherwise, this has been like one of my first long rants in a long while. Maybe I'll continue doing these. I might. Otherwise, that's been it. Peace.